to the programme. We had the new immigration and migration statistics out this week. Let's just have a look at the numbers on the screen because the numbers have never been higher. 650,000 people came here, migrants in the year to June. Take away those who were leaving, it comes to net 335,000 in the 12 months. Is that level of immigration, is it too high, too low, or about right?
Anybody that thinks that you can, any politician that thinks you can set targets for immigration has got a fool for an economic advisor. The Tories have been talking about bringing down immigration for years and years, and this is what you see. We are talking about that. What the Labour Party is talking about is trying to bear down on the reasons why immigrants come here, which is to work.
I understand, but without setting a target, is that too high, too low, or about right?
Targets don't make a difference.
I'm not asking you to set a target. I'm asking you if, in general, 335,000 net migration, is that about right or not?
It reflects underlying economic conditions, and we have to address those. It reflects the underlying economic situation, so we have to deal with that.
Do you want to reduce immigration numbers?
You can bear down on immigration. There are two main reasons why immigrants come here, and the main one is to work, and that's partly about the skills gap here in the UK, but it's partly about the fact that predatory employers use immigrants to undercut British labour, black and white, and we need to deal with that.
How many immigrants do you think are subject to predatory employers? How many are working for below the minimum wage?
We don't know, because the whole point about them working for below the minimum wage is it's not properly documented. What we want to do is to start prosecuting employers that pay below the minimum wage. I think the figures for prosecution were about 7 in the last 3 years.
Right, but since October 2013, 680,000 employers have been named and shamed for not paying it. They've had to pay arrears to the people who weren't getting the full minimum wage, and they've had to pay penalties. It comes to about £3.5 million. It only covers about 10,000 people. So we know that the number of legal migrants here, we have no evidence that there are huge numbers below the minimum wage. Illegal's another matter, but you can't show to me whether that would make a difference because you don't know the numbers.
Of course we don't know the numbers of illegals. And as for the people that have been named and shamed, and the fact that they only cover a small number of people, that just shows how weak the naming and shaming policy is. What we would do is to strengthen the factories inspectorate. We would ramp up penalties on people who are not, prosecutions on people.
They paid penalties and they had to pay the arrears.
Yeah, but
you do not know by how much migration would reduce even if there was full enforcement of the minimum wage. And by the way, a lot of these people are not migrants. They were people who were here. So it's hard to see how much, if by much at all, that would reduce immigration numbers.
But the anxiety in constituencies like Bradford is the sense that they're being undercut and they're losing jobs because of migrants coming in. And that's what we would seek to address.
You said at the last election that Labour's manifesto, which pledged to bear down on immigration numbers, was shameful. Why are you now advocating something you thought was shameful?
What I thought was shameful was those immigration controls mark, which did nothing for us and actually played very badly in some parts of the country.
But you're talking about your own form of control, to bear down, it's your phrase. No, bear down in numbers means to control it.
No, the current leadership is very clear that we want to stop undercutting of British workers, black and white, and we want to stop the exploitation of immigrants. What I think is shameful is to play a game with anti-immigrant rhetoric. We've seen across the Atlantic where that leads you. It leads you to Donald
let's just
Trump.
stay at this side of the Atlantic at the moment, because, as I say, you can't tell me how many legal migrants are being paid less than the minimum wage. You said the party policy was clear, but we've had a number of statements from your party about immigration policy. Here's Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman. It's not an objective to reduce the numbers, to reduce immigration. Jeremy Corbyn is not concerned about numbers. Here's Starmer. There's been a huge amount of immigration over the last 10 years. I think it should be reduced. Emily Thornby, our position is that we need to be open to the idea of having reasonably managed migration. Which one is Labour policy?
Our policy is fair rules and reasonable management of migration.
But which one of these three is Labour policy?
Well, the Corbyn spokesperson, I think we can discount that. That wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy's never said anything like that. However, Jeremy's been very clear that we mustn't play politics with migration.
So we discount Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman?
The spokesman, yeah.
OK, so is it Emily Thornby then? Is that the policy?
Our policy is fair rules and reasonable management of migration, and that's what Emily was saying.
Clive Lewis, your shadow business secretary, he proposed that migrants should only be allowed to come here if they belong to a trade union. Is that your policy?
I think he's rowed back from that. That would be profoundly anti-civilitarian to insist that people join a union. However, we should do everything we can to encourage people
I understand,
to join.
but you wouldn't have to be a member to join.
Clive Lewis is no longer saying that.
All right. Dan Jarvis in the film, another prominent Labour MP, says that Labour should have a target to cut immigration. You don't agree?
Well, I'm a former Home Office civil servant, and what I can tell you is that targets never work. Look at the humiliation for the Tories with their targets, bringing it down to tens of thousands, and immigration is as high as it's ever been. Targets are not the point. The point is to look at the underlying economic issues which bring migrants to our shores.
But you can give us no idea, if you were to do that and do it successfully, what the scale would be to cut the numbers, can you?
Because you cannot count, first of all, you can't count illegal migrants, and you can't count employers who are paying less than minimum wage.
Let me show you something that you said at a fringe event at the Labour conference in September in Liverpool. Let's just have a listen to
it. Would be wrong to unnecessarily throw away access to the single market in the name of controlling migration through ending single movement. It's in ending free movement, because ending free movement has become a synonym for anti-immigrant racism, and the Labour Party should never be on the wrong side of that argument.
Chuka Umunna, Rachel Reeves, Ed Balls, they've all called for an end to free movement of labour from the EU. So are they all guilty of anti-immigrant racism?
I'm aware of what they said. I'm also aware that Keir Starmer and I went to Brussels, I think last month, and we spoke to a series of spokespeople, both for the Parliament and for the Commission on freedom of movement. And they were very clear that there will be no deal on freedom of movement.
No, I didn't ask about a deal. What I'm saying is if you're against free movement, as these three Labour colleagues are, quite prominent Labour colleagues, you've said to take that position is to be guilty of anti-immigrant racism. So is that what they are guilty of?
I'm not accusing them of that, but what I am saying is they're not facing the fact. The fact is you cannot have access to the single market without commensurate freedom of movement. That's
you can. You can have access. You just can't have membership. Membership brings with it full freedom of movement. Access doesn't.
I've spoke with Keir to every major European Commission spokesperson on this, and they were clear there's no deals to be done on freedom of movement. And if we negotiated a deal which appeared to involve some diminution of freedom of movement, the European Parliament simply wouldn't vote for it.
Well, Canada now has substantial access to the single market. It's not a member, but it now has substantial access. There's no freedom of movement for Canada.
I'm telling you, you can have any European spokesperson in this studio and ask them, can we have access without commensurate freedom of movement? And they will tell you no.
So why has Canada got a robust free trade movement agreement with the EU and that doesn't involve freedom of movement? Why couldn't Britain have that too?
Because our geographical situation across the channel from the European continent is very different from Canada. The truth is there is no, whether people like it or not, it's not whether you're against freedom of movement or for freedom of movement, it's like the weather. If the UK off the channel from continental Europe wants access to the single market, there has to be commensurate freedom of movement. Otherwise, the European Parliament will not vote for that deal.
You understand the difference between access and membership?
I do, and I'm saying...
So why could we not have... I understand we couldn't have membership without freedom of movement. I'm puzzled as to why we couldn't have some degree of access. Well, what would have to be negotiated, but some degree of access that wouldn't involve free movement. There are, I think, about 30 countries around the world have substantial access to the EU, but they don't have free movement.
Europe is saying something different. You need to ask European spokespeople into the studio and ask them why they refuse to accept there can be a deal which involves no freedom of movement.
If and when we leave the EU, what would Labour's policy be towards immigration from the EU?
If and when we leave the EU, we would want fair rules and reasonable management. And as I said,
But everybody wants that. What would that mean in practice?
Well, it would mean, for instance, that we would stop employers going to Europe to recruit directly for jobs here without making those jobs open to British people.
But we don't know, again, how much that difference would make. You would have the freedom to have a policy. Would you have a policy on immigration?
This country, the Labour Party's always had a policy on
No, to the
immigration.
EU.
We've always had a policy
At
on
the moment, we
immigration.
don't have a policy because we can't have one. It is free movement. When free movement comes to an end, on what basis would we allow EU citizens to come and work here?
It would be on the basis of fairness, and it would be on the basis of what's good for the economy, because I think that's what's being lost sight of in this debate.
Your Shadow Cabinet colleague, John Healey, said this week that Labour just doesn't understand what matters to many working class communities. Is he wrong?
He's wrong if what he's saying is that we have to move right on immigration to save seats from UKIP. My belief is that if the Labour Party starts saying that, of course, UKIP is right and immigration is the cause of all these people's problems, I think if we start saying that, that actually gives credence to UKIP.
Thank you very much. You made that clear at the end. Thank you.
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.